He said it right beside her coffin. "Sell her car too, Dad. No point keeping it." The words came out smooth, rehearsed, as if he'd practiced them in the mirror before walking into the church. I was staring at the white roses on my wife's casket when his voice cut through the murmurs, clean and cold. "Sell her car." My wife hadn't even been in the ground for an hour, and my son was already tallying up her belongings. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and tell us where you're listening from. It was a humid Sunday in Charleston, May 12th. The church smelled of lilies and polished wood. My son, Andrew, looked sharp as ever in his tailored navy suit, the same one he wore to his real estate closings. Only this time, there was no contract to sign, no commission to earn, just his mother's farewell. When the service ended, people drifted to the reception hall next door. Coffee cups, folded napkins, small talk about weather. Everything felt distant. I heard Andrew laughing with his cousin near the buffet table. "Dad doesn't need 2 cars, he said. "Might as well liquidate before taxes kick in." Liquidate. He used that word like he was talking about stock options, not his mother's memories. I stood near the window, watching the rain streak down the glass. My late wife, Margaret, had loved that car, a silver 2017 Mercedes E-Class. She called it her escape route. Every Friday, she'd drive it down the Ashley River Road just to watch the sunset. I could still see her hands on the wheel, rings catching the light. Selling it would be like erasing her voice from the house. That night, I found the car keys still hanging on the wall hook. I took a photo of them, then another of the car sitting in the garage, dry and still under the soft light. The odometer read 42,816 miles. I wrote the number down on an old grocery receipt. Habit of an accountant. You learn to document before you lose track. Andrew came by the next morning, acting like nothing happened. He brought coffee and pastries, his favorite tactic when he wanted something. "We should talk about Mom's estate," he said, flipping open his tablet. "Her jewelry, the house title, the car—" I cut him off. "Not today." He smiled the way salesmen do when they think they've already closed the deal. "You're grieving. I can handle the paperwork." Later that afternoon, I got a call from my lawyer, Ms. Tate, offering condolences. I asked her one question. "His power of attorney ends when she passes, right?" She hesitated. "Correct. He can't touch anything without your consent." I thanked her and hung up. That evening, I walked back into the garage. I ran my hand along the hood, still warm from the last drive she ever took. I whispered, "Don't worry, Maggie. He won't touch this." But somewhere deep down, I knew. This was only the beginning. The morning after the funeral, Charleston felt like it had been rinsed and left out to dry. Monday, May 13th. Sunlight slid across the kitchen tile and made everything look too clean, like a staged home instead of a lived-in one. I made coffee the way Margaret liked it, 2 scoops and a pinch more, then stopped myself and poured half back. I set 1 mug on her side of the table anyway. Old muscle memory fights reality longer than the heart does. At 9:12 a.m., Andrew texted, "We should outline Mom's estate this afternoon. House, jewelry, car. Quick call?" He added a thumbs up. I stared at the bubble until the screen dimmed. I typed a single word. "No." I tried to fold my suit from the day before and only got as far as the sleeves before my hands started to shake. Grief does not like straight lines. I left it crumpled on the chair and went to the garage. The Mercedes sat under the soft dome light, the kind that makes metal look like water. I opened the driver's door and checked the odometer again. 42,816. I whispered the number like a prayer, then wrote it, in ink, on the back of a grocery receipt and slid it into my wallet. I took one more photo of the keys on the hook. Accounting is control when nothing else is. By noon, neighbors had started dropping off casseroles in foil pans with labels in blue marker. Brooke from 3 doors down hugged me too long and told me about some church group. I nodded and set her tuna bake beside a lasagna. People mean well. Pity is a blanket that never warms you. At 2:05 p.m., I noticed a yellow envelope propped against the sugar jar. It was new. My name was typed in a font Andrew uses for his listing flyers. Inside, 10 pages, stapled at the corner. Estate liquidation plan, it said, centered and bold. Line items marched down the page with neat estimates beside them. Jewelry box, $12,000 to $15,000. Dining room set, $2,000. Mercedes E-Class, $48,000 to $52,000. The line after that made my jaw lock. Misk Personal Effects, quick sale, $3,000. At the bottom, a signature that looked suspiciously like his own careful print, and a title beneath it in italics. Approved by family executor. I set the packet on the counter and felt the whole room tilt, like a boat pushing off a dock. Margaret had joked sometimes that our son could sell air and invoice the breeze. It had never been funny to me. Not really, I called Eleanor. She answered on the first ring like she had been waiting beside the phone. I figured you would call today, she said. You holding together? Someone left a plan on my counter, I said. Says the car is worth $50,000 and that I should let the family executor take it from here. Executor, she repeated. He wrote that? Typed it. Come by. I found something of Maggie's you should see. I took Calhoun to Rutledge, and then cut down a shaded street where the oaks hooked their limbs over the asphalt like old men leaning in to listen. Eleanor lived in a narrow white house that smelled like lemon oil and old books. She handed me a leather-bound journal with a frayed ribbon tucked between pages. Margaret's handwriting sloped toward the right, confident and quick. I turned until the ribbon's page opened. A small block of text sat at the top. The car stays with him. It is our memory lane. There was a pressed blue hydrangea petal taped under the sentence, probably from last spring. I ran my finger over the tape and felt an actual physical thing I could hold that said no. Grief loosened its chokehold for a moment, and a different feeling moved in behind it. Not anger, not yet. Resolve, the slow kind, like concrete setting. Back at the house, I slid the journal into the locked drawer of my desk. I put the yellow envelope next to it, laid flat, not folded. People think evidence is a smoking gun. It is mostly paper. I wrote a date at the top of a blank legal pad. May 13, I listed what I knew. Keys on hook, photographed. Odometer, 42816, recorded. Title in filing cabinet A, folder vehicle. Insurance policy in filing cabinet B, folder household. Power of attorney expired on death. Confirmed by Tate. Yellow envelope found on counter at 2:05 p.m. Tetrasihinahon at Kadanfone. Presumed Andrew delivery. At 4:19 p.m., Ms. Tate called. Her condolences sounded less like a script and more like a real person this time. I asked her to repeat what she had told me the day before. Power of attorney terminates upon death. She added gently that any attempt by Andrew to act under that former authority could expose him to both civil and criminal liability. I wrote her words down exactly and underlined expose him once. Do you think he is that reckless? She asked. He used the word liquidate at a funeral reception, I said. I think he is that empty. We hung up, and the house went still. I could hear the kitchen clock. I could hear my own breath. I could hear the part of me that wanted to call Andrew and tear into him with everything I had. But what would that do? I am an accountant. When the numbers do not add up, you do not scream at the spreadsheet. You audit. At 6:40 p.m., Andrew texted again. Dad, we need momentum. I lined up a guy who can move the Mercedes fast. He is a cash buyer. We will get top dollar. He added a winky face, the kind that tries to turn a threat into a joke. I did not reply. I set my phone face down and took out a pen. I wrote a sentence on the pad under the date. Do not warn him. If you warn him, he will pivot. Let him choose the road he believes is safe. Let him take the step. I heated Brooks' tuna bake and ate it standing up at the counter, staring at the yellow envelope like it might sprout legs and run. I washed the dish and left it to dry. Then I went back to the garage and pulled down the attic ladder. I rummaged through a dusty box until I found a small black key fob I had not touched in years. A spare garage door remote from when we upgraded the system. I wrote its serial number down on the pad and put the remote in the desk drawer with the journal and the envelope. Locks and keys are just another way to count. At 9:03 p.m., Eleanor texted a photo. Andrew at a bar, sleeve rolled, watch face catching the flash. The caption on whoever's story it was read, "To easy money." I stared at his grin and felt something inside me swing from collapse to clarity. I went back to the legal pad and drew a line across the page. Under it, I wrote tomorrow, May 14th, and 2 words that changed the direction of everything that followed. Start quietly. May 14, Tuesday. The first morning I woke up without crying. Not because the pain was gone, but because something colder had taken its place. Focus. I've always believed grief and arithmetic share one rule. Carry the remainder. What you can't solve, you carry forward until you do. I started by gathering facts. At 8:12 a.m., I opened the bottom drawer of my desk, the one Margaret always called the vault. Inside was a folder labeled Vehicle. It held the car title, her original purchase invoice from Mercedes-Benz of Charleston, dated June 2017, and the insurance renewal slip from February 2025. I photographed each document and placed the originals back in the drawer. Then I logged the images in a folder on my desktop named Proof 1. Accountants don't forget to timestamp. By noon, I had a plan. Quiet, clean, provable. Eleanor came over with chicken salad and suspicion written all over her face. "What are you thinking?" she asked. "I'm thinking our boy wants to sell something he doesn't own," I said. "And you're going to let him?" "I'm going to let him believe he can." She didn't press. She knew that tone, the one Margaret used to call my audit voice. That evening, I went online and ordered a Nest Motion camera, overnight delivery. I set it up in the garage before sunset the next day, tucked discreetly between boxes of gardening tools. It streamed to the cloud automatically, silent and reliable. I took a screenshot of the live feed on my phone. The silver Mercedes under the overhead light, every curve glinting. At 6:40 p.m., Andrew texted again. "Need the garage key. Gonna get the car appraised. Big offer incoming." I replied, "Come by in the morning. I'll have it ready." That night, I removed the real garage key from my keychain and replaced it with a blank duplicate, identical in shape, useless in function. Then, using the spare remote I'd found in the attic, I changed the door code entirely. The system beeped once, a new beginning, mechanical and cold. The next morning, Wednesday, May 15th, Andrew showed up at 8:30. He had on sunglasses and that realtor's grin he wore when he wanted something signed. "Morning, Dad. Figured I'd save you the hassle and get the car evaluated. Easy cash, right?" I handed him the blank key and said, "Sure. Don't scratch her." He pocketed it, flashing teeth. "I'll treat her like gold." I watched him drive away in his own SUV, not the Mercedes. The irony made me smile. By noon, Ms. Tate called. "He reached out," she said. "Asked if the title was in his name yet. Claimed you were getting old and might forget." "Can you forward me that email?" I asked. Already did. The subject line read, "Request to transfer maternal vehicle. Andrew Lang." The timestamp was 11:03 a.m. The arrogance was time-stamped too. At 3:42 p.m., I had the car quietly moved. A towing service I'd used for years, Harbor Hall Logistics, sent a truck. The driver, a polite man named Craig, signed the bill of lading, $480 paid in cash. Destination, Eleanor's garage, 2 miles away. I took photos of the handoff, including the signature and time. 3:27 p.m. By 4:00, the Mercedes sat behind Eleanor's locked wooden doors. She sent a text with a photo. Safe and sound. Back home, I draped a gray tarp in the empty spot and positioned 2 cardboard boxes under it, shaped roughly like a car silhouette. From the camera feed, it looked convincing. That evening, Andrew called again. "We good for tomorrow? Buyer's ready with cash." I said, "Go ahead. Just keep me posted." He paused, maybe confused, maybe thrilled at how easily I was giving in. "Really? You trust me on this?" I said, "I trust you to be yourself." He laughed. "That's what Mom used to say." "She was a good judge of character," I replied, and hung up. Later that night, I sat at my desk, scrolling through the footage. I could see the dust motes floating in the beam from the garage light. Stillness before the storm. I printed the towing receipt and stapled it to the legal pad where I'd written "Start quietly." Below it, I added a new line: "Let him act first." Before bed, I opened Margaret's journal again and reread her line. "The car stays with him." "It is our memory lane," I whispered. "It will, Maggie. Just not the way he thinks." The next day would test everything: patience, control, and whether truth still carried any weight in family. But I had the ledger balanced now. 1 lie from him, 1 truth from me. Tomorrow, I decided, the audit begins. Thursday, May the 16th. Charleston woke up humid and bright, the kind of morning where sunlight hits the driveway before you do. My phone buzzed at 7:42 a.m. A motion alert from the Nest camera. I rubbed my eyes, opened the app, and watched the live feed. There he was, Andrew. Wearing his navy jacket again, sleeves rolled, hair gelled back like he was about to close another deal. Behind him stood a man I didn't recognize. Jeans, baseball cap, clipboard. They weren't here to mourn. They were here to collect. The footage caught everything. Andrew fumbling with the blank garage key. The metallic clank of failure when it didn't fit. He cursed under his breath, glanced at the camera he didn't know existed, then kicked the side door. I could almost hear Margaret's voice saying, "Let him dig his own hole, honey." He gestured to the man, who muttered something and shook his head. They tried the lock again. Nothing. Andrew pulled his phone, pacing, talking too fast. After a minute, the man stormed off, leaving Andrew standing alone beside the tarp. He kicked the wall once more, hard, then walked out of frame. I saved the clip, downloaded it twice, and emailed a copy to myself. 1 under my name, 1 to Ms. Tate. The subject line read, "Unauthorized entry attempt, May 16th, 07:42 a.m. By 9:30, Andrew texted me. "Dad, did you move Mom's car?" I replied, "No. Why? Garage looks weird. Might have been stolen. Should we call insurance?" I stared at the message for a full minute, coffee going cold in my hand. He was fast, already building the alibi. "File the report if you think it's necessary," I wrote. He didn't respond for an hour. Then came another message. "Don't worry, I'll handle it." At 11:02 a.m., my bank app pinged with a notification. $48,200 withdrawn from the joint estate account. The note in the memo line said, "Private buyer deposit." I didn't shout. I didn't slam the phone. I simply printed the confirmation slip on my home printer, dated and time-stamped, and placed it beside the yellow estate plan envelope. He had sold a car that wasn't there. By noon, I called Ms. Tate. "He's done it." She asked me to come by the office. When I arrived, she had already printed the footage frames I'd emailed earlier. She spread them across her desk like tarot cards. "Andrew, the stranger, the empty tarp. This is better than evidence," she said quietly. "This is sequence. Theft, deception, transaction, all recorded in order." "What now?" I asked. "Nothing. Yet. Nothing. Let him think he's won. It's always cleaner when they think the storm has passed." On the way home, I stopped at a gas station and bought a cheap USB drive. I saved every document, footage, bank statement, texts, on it, and labeled it May 16 Audit. Accountants don't gamble. They back up. At 4:05 p.m., my phone buzzed again. A social media notification. Andrew had posted a photo. He was standing beside a different silver Mercedes, champagne in hand, arm around his girlfriend. Caption: New beginnings. Grind never stops. I sat there staring at the screen, a laugh building somewhere deep and strange. Not joy, not madness, just clarity. He'd used Mom's death to buy a symbol of success. A car for a ghost. That evening, I drove to Eleanor's house. The real Mercedes was still there, quiet and safe, a layer of dust already forming on the hood. He's parading a phantom, I told her. Let him, she said. Ghosts have a way of haunting the living. Before bed, I wrote in my ledger again, May 16th, withdrawn $48,200, Andrew. Evidence secured. Next step, freeze account before he can transfer funds. At 10:57 p.m., Ms. Tate texted, let him sleep easy tonight. Tomorrow, we file. I closed my phone and turned off the lights. The house felt smaller, tighter, but not lonely anymore. Purpose fills the air like heat. Invisible, but undeniable. As I passed the garage on the way to bed, I stopped and looked at the empty space where the Mercedes once sat. The tarp sagged like a stage curtain after the final act. Good performance, I whispered, because now, Act 2 wasn't grief anymore. It was audit, and audits, I knew, always end in balance. Friday, May 17th. The storm didn't come from the sky. It came from my son's voice. I was sitting at the kitchen table, coffee going lukewarm, when the phone rang. His name flashed on the screen. I let it buzz 3 times before answering. Dad, listen, Andrew started, his tone fake calm, the way people talk to clients they're trying to keep from walking away. There's been some confusion. The insurance company just needs your signature for the car transfer. Nothing big, I said. Bring the form. He paused. Maybe he thought I'd resist. You sure? Come by. When he arrived that afternoon, the humidity had turned the air into soup. He wore the same cologne Margaret used to complain about. Smells like a bank lobby, she'd say. He smiled like he was back in control. The golden boy with a plan. Here, he said, laying a crisp sheet of paper on the counter. Transfer confirmation for the insurance. They just need your signature on that line. I put on my reading glasses and looked down. It wasn't an insurance form. It was a vehicle ownership release. Typed at the bottom was transfer to Andrew Lang. I said, You sure this is insurance-related? He hesitated. They bundle it. It's just policy language. Policy language, I repeated, taking a slow sip of coffee. Then I signed, but not on his line. I signed a blank sheet of printer paper I'd placed underneath the form while pretending to adjust my glasses. He didn't notice. When he left, he said, You'll thank me when this is all handled. I waited until the sound of his car faded down the street, then lifted the fake signature form. The sheet underneath now carried my clean signature, ready for whatever came next. My insurance policy against his lies. At 4:32 p.m., Ms. Tate filed for a temporary restraining order on the estate account. Within hours, the bank froze the $48,200. The estate funds were safe. I texted her a simple thank you. She replied with a single checkmark emoji. That evening, Eleanor texted me a screenshot from Instagram. Andrew's girlfriend had posted a photo of them at a steakhouse, the kind of place where dinner costs more than a mortgage payment. The caption read, To easy money and clean slates. It was tagged 2 hours before he came to my house asking for my signature. I poured myself a glass of bourbon, the one Margaret bought me for our anniversary, and sat in silence. Somewhere between guilt and fury, there was a thin, cold satisfaction. The next morning, the phone rang again. It wasn't a call. It was a storm. Andrew's voice was sharp, panicked. Dad, what the hell did you do? The bank froze the account. I let him speak. Let him sweat. Maybe you should ask your lawyer, I said. You had no right. I had every right. It's my account, not yours. He exhaled hard, the kind of sound that comes from hitting a wall. You're ruining everything. You have no idea what you've done. I know exactly what I've done, I said. I stopped a thief. He went quiet. Then, low and mean, You'll regret this. I said, I already don't. He hung up. An hour later, Eleanor called. He's furious. Called me. Said you're destroying the family. The family, I said, almost laughing. That's rich. At 6:10 p.m., I walked into the garage and stared at the tarp, still sagging, untouched since the day he tried to break in. I switched on the camera feed. No motion alerts, just quiet. Then I wrote in my ledger again. May 17th. Attempted fraud exposed. Account frozen. Son unstable. The calm before the real confrontation. Because I knew what came next. Public fallout. Greed doesn't stop in private. It spills. Saturday morning, I dressed in my gray suit, the one I hadn't worn since Margaret's wake. As I tightened the cufflinks she gave me, I realized something strange. My hands weren't shaking anymore. When Ms. Tate called, her voice carried that precise tone only lawyers get when they already know the ending. He's filed a complaint, she said. Claims you're withholding his inheritance. I smiled. Then we'll let him prove it. Charleston County Probate Court. That was our next stop. And I planned to make sure my son finally understood what liquidation really meant. Monday, May 20th. Charleston County Probate Court smelled like lemon cleaner and fear. The marble floors looked too polished, reflecting people who didn't want to see themselves. I sat in the second row beside Ms. Tate, tie tightened, folder on my lap marked May 16th Audit. Andrew was 3 benches ahead, shoulders squared, his hair perfect. He looked like he was heading into a sales pitch, not a reckoning. The clerk called our case, Lang v. Lang Estate Dispute. I never thought I'd hear my own name echo twice like that. Once as father, once as defendant. Andrew rose first, smoothing his jacket. His attorney, a young man with too much confidence and not enough experience, cleared his throat. Your Honor, my client seeks relief from undue withholding of inherited property, the lawyer began. His late mother's assets, specifically a Mercedes-Benz E-Class, were promised to him as part of her intended distribution. The judge, a woman in her 60s with silver hair and eyes sharp as glass, tilted her head. Promised? Was there a will stating this? Not in writing, the lawyer admitted, but family agreement was implied. Ms. Tate rose, calm as a metronome. Your Honor, we have documentation confirming the opposite. She handed the clerk a folder, every sheet aligned like soldiers. Andrew's attorney smiled faintly, as if amused. We contend the father has manipulated these records to his advantage. The judge gestured. Let's see what manipulation looks like. Ms. Tate clicked a remote, and the courtroom monitor flickered to life. On the screen, the garage camera footage began to play, time-stamped May 16th, 07:42 a.m. Andrew appeared, frowning, trying the blank key. The sound of the lock failing echoed through the speakers, followed by the dull clang of his kick against the door. Someone in the back row gasped. The judge leaned forward. Is that Mr. Lang, Jr.? Yes, Your Honor, Ms. Tate said. Attempting entry to his late mother's secured property without consent. Andrew shifted in his seat. That footage is fake, he muttered, but the judge lifted a hand. You'll have your turn. Next came the bank statement. The clerk read it aloud. Withdrawal of $48,200 from joint estate account. Memo reads, Private buyer deposit. Ms. Tate followed smoothly. We have certified confirmation from Charleston National Bank that Mr. Lang, Sr. had no knowledge of this withdrawal. The funds were moved under the assumption of an illegal sale. Andrew's lawyer objected, voice cracking. The funds were for valuation. Ms. Tate slid another document across. Valuation? Then explain the social media post showing Mr. Lang celebrating a new purchase with those same funds. Captioned, "To easy money." The judge looked at Andrew. "Did you post this?" He swallowed. "It was just a joke." "Do you find defrauding an estate humorous?" He didn't answer. Ms. Tate wasn't finished. "We also submit a towing receipt dated May 15th, confirming that the vehicle in question had been relocated to a secured address prior to this incident, with witnesses present." Meaning, Mr. Lang attempted to sell an asset that was no longer there. She paused, letting the silence do the work. "Your Honor, he sold a ghost," the judge turned to me. "Mr. Lang Sr., do you have anything to add?" I stood. My knees didn't shake this time. My wife, Margaret, wrote in her journal that the car stays with me. It was her wish. My son saw her death as liquidation. I saw it as legacy. I placed the open journal on the evidence table, a blue hydrangea petal still taped to the page. The judge studied it, then looked back at Andrew. "This seems pretty clear," his lawyer tried again, desperation creeping into his voice. "Your Honor, surely we can resolve this privately." But the judge cut him off. "Privately is how this started. Publicly is how it ends." The bailiff handed her the ruling draft. She read aloud. "Given the presented evidence, unauthorized access, misappropriation of estate funds, and attempted fraud, the court orders immediate restitution of $48,200 to the estate, plus legal fees and formal censure. Mr. Lang Jr. will complete community service as part of suspended sentencing." The gavel came down with a sharp crack. Andrew stared at the table, face drained. His lawyer packed up without a word. I could almost hear the sound of something collapsing inside him, the weight of self-made ruin. As people began to file out, the judge added, softer now, "Mr. Lang Sr., I hope this brings peace to your household." "Peace," I said quietly, "is earned." Outside, the air smelled of rain on hot pavement. Eleanor was waiting near the steps. She handed me her umbrella even though the drizzle had already stopped. "How'd it go?" she asked. "He sold what he never owned," I said. "And got the bill for it," she smiled. A small, proud smile. "Maggie would have liked that." We walked to the parking lot in silence. I looked up at the gray Charleston sky and thought of Margaret's voice again. Soft, amused, saying, "He'll learn, just slower than most." At the car, I stopped. "You think he'll ever understand what today was?" Eleanor folded the umbrella. "One day, when he loses something that can't be repossessed." I nodded. The courthouse doors closed behind us with a hollow thud, like the end of an era. That night, I opened the garage camera feed one last time. The tarp still hung in the same place, untouched. I turned it off. The show was over. The next morning, I drove to Eleanor's and picked up the real Mercedes. I didn't speak on the drive home. I just listened to the hum of the engine, the same sound Margaret used to love. Justice, I learned that day, doesn't need applause. It only needs proof, and I had all of it. By the time the court's decision hit paper, Charleston had turned to summer. The air thickened, cicadas screamed from the oaks, and the city moved on. Everyone except my son. News travels fast in small professional circles. Realtors talk. By Wednesday, whispers had already begun. The golden boy who forged his father's signature and tried to sell a dead woman's car. Charleston's market thrives on trust, and Andrews was gone. He called me the next night. I let it ring out twice before answering. "You won," he said. His voice sounded older, brittle. "Congratulations." "This wasn't about winning," I said. "It always is for you." The ledger, the receipts, the perfect audit. I stayed quiet. Silence, I've learned, can weigh more than a sentence. Then he added, quieter now, "I didn't think you'd take it that far." "You broke into your mother's garage," I said. "I just kept the lights on." He hung up without another word. Over the next week, I saw his face everywhere. Not in newspapers, but in people's lowered voices. One afternoon, Eleanor showed me a message from a friend. He's been suspended. Brokerage says reputation concerns. When she told me, I didn't smile. I just nodded. He needed the lesson. At home, I spent the evening cleaning the Mercedes. I washed it slow, methodical, like I was restoring order to more than metal. Margaret's rosary still hung from the rearview mirror, swaying softly with each pass of the towel. When I turned on the engine, the dashboard clock blinked 8:24 p.m. Same time she used to start her evening drives. I parked it in the driveway this time, not hidden. The headlights reflected off the windows of the house, spilling light into rooms that had felt empty for weeks. For the first time since the funeral, I slept through the night. 2 weeks later, an envelope arrived. $48 to $200, returned via cashier's check. Inside was a typed note from Andrew's attorney. Client has complied with restitution order. I held the check for a while before setting it down. Then I called the hospice center that cared for Margaret during her final months. When the director answered, I said, "I'd like to make a donation in her name." Half the check went to them that day. The rest, I deposited back into the estate account, untouchable, right where it should have been all along. Eleanor came by that weekend. She stood in the garage doorway, looking at the car gleaming in the afternoon light. "You ever going to drive it again?" she asked. "Maybe," I said. "But for now, it's fine right here." She smiled softly. "Feels like she's home again." "Yeah," I said, closing the garage door slowly. "And I'm finally guarding the right things." Later that night, I found myself writing in my ledger again, though the case was closed. One last entry. June 3rd, restitution received. Car restored. Family fractured, but truth intact. I set down the pen and stared at the page. The columns balanced perfectly. Debit met credit. Wrong met right. Revenge hadn't brought joy. But justice had brought stillness. When I went upstairs, I caught a glimpse of Margaret's photograph on the hallway wall. She was laughing, mid-motion, head tilted, sun in her hair. I whispered to her picture, "We're square, Maggie. Finally." Outside, the night was clear, the cicadas gone quiet. For the first time, the silence didn't feel like loss. It felt like peace. June 10th. The courthouse papers were barely a week old when Ms. Tate called to finalize everything. I drove downtown, the Mercedes humming under the summer sun. Charleston glowed that day. Spanish moss hanging low over the streets, air thick with salt and jasmine. It felt like the city itself had exhaled after months of holding its breath. Ms. Tate's office sat on the second floor of an old brick building overlooking the harbor. When I walked in, she already had the documents stacked neatly on her desk. Finalized probate rulings, bank confirmations, notarized letters, everything bound and stamped. She looked up and smiled. "Well, Mr. Lang, it's all settled. The estate is officially closed, funds restored, and the vehicle title is now in your name." I nodded. "Good. That's how she wanted it." She slid one more paper across the desk. "This one's optional. You can add a co-owner for symbolic purposes." I read the line she'd penciled in. Co-owner, Margaret Keller Lang. I felt my throat tighten. "You mind typing her maiden name instead?" Ms. Tate smiled knowingly. "Of course." She made the change, printed it again, and passed me the fresh copy. "Closure's important, even in small details." I signed and handed her the pen back. "Grief made me forget how much numbers can heal," I said. "Numbers don't lie," she replied, "but people do." You used that truth well. We walked through the closing paperwork together. Every page told the same story. His lies, my proof, her legacy. Justice, line by line. Before I left, she said something I still remember. "You didn't just win a case, you restored balance." Not many people can say that. I thanked her, tucked the documents into my folder, and stepped outside. The afternoon sun hit the papers through the window, and for a second, they glowed like something sacred. On the drive home, I stopped by the post office. I mailed a sealed envelope addressed to the hospice again. Inside, a short handwritten note, in memory of Margaret, who believed kindness still counts. When I got home, the garage smelled faintly of polish and old rain. I placed the new title in the drawer labeled Vehicle. Final. Then I took a small index card and wrote a single sentence. Trust, once sold, is never bought back. I slid it into the same folder. That evening, I sat in the car. Engine off. The silence inside felt like church. I ran my hand over the steering wheel, the leather warm from the sun. Margaret's rosary swayed slightly on the mirror. I whispered, "It's yours, again." Outside, the neighbors' porch lights came on one by one. Charleston evenings have a way of softening everything, the anger, the ache, even the edges of memory. I thought about Andrew, wherever he was now. Maybe still trying to rebuild a reputation money couldn't buy back. I didn't hate him. Hate is too heavy to carry once you've already buried someone you love. Instead, I felt something quieter, a boundary, a line drawn in calm ink. Justice wasn't a gavel or a headline. It was balance. It was the sound of the garage door closing on something finally settled. As I turned off the lights and headed upstairs, I paused at the hallway photo of Margaret. Her smile looked less like memory and more like approval. I said softly, "Ledger's clear, Maggie. Justice delivered." And in that moment, it truly was. Nights feel different once justice has been served. The quiet isn't empty anymore. It hums like the air right after a storm. I started taking evening drives again. Same route Margaret used to love. Down Ashley River Road, through the live oaks, where the light bends low and gold. I'd roll the window halfway, let the wind do what grief couldn't, move through me. The car still smelled faintly of her perfume, that subtle gardenia she always wore. Sometimes I caught myself turning my head as if she were sitting beside me, hand resting on the gear shift, humming off key to some old Sinatra song. Grief doesn't disappear. It changes its shape, learns new manners. It stops shouting and starts whispering instead. I'd pull over near the overlook where the water turns to glass at sunset and just sit there. The city hums in the distance, far enough to remind you that life keeps going whether you're ready or not. I'd think about Andrew, his voice in the courtroom, the arrogance collapsing into silence. I didn't feel victory, I felt distance, a necessary kind. He wasn't raised to be cruel. Margaret made sure of that. But somewhere between ambition and inheritance, he started mistaking love for leverage. Maybe he thought responsibility came with a receipt. Maybe he thought loss could be monetized. A week after the final paperwork, I found one of his old report cards in a box labeled MISC. He was 12 then, straight A's, and under teacher comments it said, "Excellent with numbers, must learn humility." I smiled. "Still true," I said out loud. That night, I sat by the garage window and looked at the Mercedes parked beneath the light. The reflection of the rosary swung across the hood like a pendulum marking time. Justice had been served, yes, but time was still the real judge. I thought about calling him once, just to ask how he was doing. My hand even hovered over the phone. But then I remembered the line Margaret had once written in her journal after one of our rare fights. "You can't teach someone who thinks they already know." So I didn't call. Not yet. Instead, I wrote him a letter I didn't send. It started, "Andrew, there's no inheritance more valuable than integrity. You lost money, I lost trust. We can both earn one back, but only one of us will know how." I folded it, sealed it, and tucked it into the same folder where I kept the car title. Maybe one day he'd find it. Days turned into weeks. The house settled into its new rhythm. One cup of coffee, one plate, one set of keys. I got used to the sound of my own footsteps again. Some evenings, Eleanor stopped by with fresh bread or gossip from church. We'd sit on the porch, two survivors of the same storm, talking about things that didn't hurt anymore. She asked once, "Do you ever regret how far you took it?" I thought about it. "No," I said finally. Because it wasn't revenge. It was correction. Revenge wants someone to bleed. Correction wants someone to learn. Eleanor nodded. "And did he?" "Not yet," I said. "But learning takes time. I'm patient." Before she left, she looked at me with that quiet kindness Margaret had. "You know," she said, "you didn't just protect a car, you protected a memory." After she drove off, I stood there watching her taillights fade down the street. The air smelled like rain again, the same scent from the funeral day. Only now it didn't sting. Justice had ended the noise. Reflection taught me how to listen again. I whispered toward the dark. "You were right, Maggie. Some lessons need silence." And for the first time in months, I believed it. By July, the summer heat pressed down on Charleston like a weight. The story had already become old news. People forget fast. That's the mercy of small scandals. But for me, forgetting wasn't the goal. Remembering precisely was. I spent mornings trimming the garden Margaret once tended, careful not to uproot her lavender rose. Routine became medicine. By noon, I'd take the Mercedes for a slow spin around the block. Radio low, windows down. Sometimes neighbors waved. Sometimes they looked away. Either was fine. Eleanor stopped by one Sunday carrying a brown envelope. "It's from him," she said. I didn't take it right away. "You opened it?" She shook her head. "Didn't have to. His handwriting's on the front. Took courage for him to send it." When I finally did open it that night, the first thing that fell out was a photograph. Andrew, standing in front of a modest apartment building, a woman beside him, a baby in her arms. On the back, in shaky handwriting, he'd written, "I'll do better this time. No apology." No excuses. Just that. For the first time in months, I didn't feel anger. I felt something closer to release. Maybe that's what forgiveness actually is. Not permission. Just release. I sat there at the kitchen table, photo in one hand, bourbon in the other, and said quietly, "That's a start." The next morning, I called Ms. Tate. "Can you update my will?" "Of course," she said. "Any changes?" "Yes," I told her. "One line, the car stays with him, but only if he keeps it." She laughed softly. Poetic condition. Margaret would have liked it. 2 weeks later, I drove to the church cemetery for the first time since the funeral. The grass had grown tall. I brought scissors, trimmed around the headstone myself. I spoke out loud because silence always felt dishonest there. "He's trying, Maggie," I said. "Or pretending to. Either way, that's progress." The wind picked up, carrying the smell of rain from the marsh. A single petal from the roses I brought slipped off and landed on the ground. Pink against gray stone. I took that as my answer. Back home, I sat in the garage with the door open. The evening light hit the Mercedes in long streaks. Dust floated like gold flakes in the beam. I pressed the ignition. The dashboard flickered on, clock blinking 6:47 p.m. I eased the car out, slow, careful. The neighborhood was quiet. Halfway down the street, a little girl waved from her front porch. I waved back. For a second, it felt like life had rounded a corner. When I parked again, I left the engine running for a minute longer, listening to it purr. Then I shut it off, stepped out, and leaned against the hood. My reflection stared back at me in the silver paint, older, heavier, but calmer. Eleanor pulled up just then. "You okay?" she asked. I smiled. "Better than I deserve." She looked at the car and said, "It suits you again." "Maybe it always did," I replied. "I just had to earn it back." That night, I tucked the photo of Andrew and his new family into Margaret's journal, right beside the page where she'd written, "The car stays with him." I closed it gently, slid it into the drawer, and locked it. Not to hide it, to preserve it. Because what comes after revenge isn't vengeance, it's stillness, the kind where you finally stop keeping score. Before I turned out the light, I whispered, "Ledger balanced, Maggie. For good this time." And I swear, the garage settled just a little, like a sigh of agreement. August rolled in with a restless kind of heat, the kind that sticks to your collar and makes even the quiet hum of an engine sound heavy. Charleston summers don't end, they linger, like unfinished conversations. The Mercedes was due for service. I hadn't taken it in since Margaret's last drive, so I booked an appointment at the same garage she used downtown, Cole's Automotive on Spring Street. She liked that place because the old mechanic, Earl, always called her ma'am and never upsold her on anything she didn't need. I arrived early, 9:03 a.m. Earl was still the same, gray beard, oil-stained hands, calm as a church organist. He looked at the paperwork and grinned. "You're Mrs. Lang's husband, right? Haven't seen this car in years." "That's right," I said, handing him the keys. "Just a tune-up. Keep her running smooth." He nodded, glancing at the folder of documents I carried. "Still the accountant type, huh?" "Old habits die slower than people do," I replied. He laughed, rolled the car into the bay, and told me to wait inside where it was cooler. The radio was playing some old soul track, and for a second I caught myself tapping my foot like Margaret used to. 15 minutes later, Earl walked back out, wiping his hands on a rag. "Mr. Lang, you're all set," he said, "and looks like you've got a little surprise here." I frowned. "Surprise?" He handed me an invoice and a small white envelope. "Your account's already paid. Balance zero. Says right here, prepayment credit, $480. "Prepayment?" I asked, confused. "From who?" He shrugged. "Notes say it was paid a few months back. Cash. No name on record, just the last 4 digits of a phone number." He read them out loud. They were Andrew's. For a second, I didn't move. The noise of the garage faded. Just the ticking of cooling engines and the faint hum of a fan. The number echoed in my mind, matching perfectly with the towing receipt total I'd paid back in May. $480. I stared down at the invoice, and a quiet laugh slipped out. Soft, disbelieving, almost fond. Maybe guilt had a way of balancing its own books. Maybe he remembered. "Everything all right?" Earl asked. "Yeah," I said, folding the paper carefully. "Everything's balanced." Driving home, the air felt lighter. I rolled down the windows, let the heat and wind blend. At a red light. I looked at the passenger seat. The sunlight hit the rosary and made it shimmer. When I pulled into the driveway, I parked the car in the same spot it had always belonged. Then I walked inside and opened my ledger one last time. August 2nd. Service complete. Account prepaid. Guilt refunded. I closed it, pressed my hand over the cover and whispered, "Ledger closed." Later that evening I sat on the porch with a cup of coffee, watching the sun sink behind the magnolias. A breeze carried the faint sound of a child laughing somewhere down the block. I thought of Andrew again, his photo, the baby, that shaky handwriting. Maybe he'd learned that money can't buy absolution, but it can signal remorse. And maybe that was enough. I tilted my head toward the empty chair beside me, her chair, and said, "You were right again, Maggie. He didn't lose me. He lost his mirror." The porch light flickered as the sky went from amber to blue. And in that quiet moment, I understood something I hadn't before. Revenge ends, but reflection keeps you honest. I sipped the last of my coffee, let the evening settle, and smiled to myself. Justice, after all, had come full circle, with interest.